Welcome to Transmission, Mr. Douglas. This episode of Investigating Michael Topper's work, we discuss his essay, Matrix Initiate Classes and Related Materials by MT, with some additional content from Matrix 4 and the new Thunderbird Chronicle. We start with an overview of reality and spiritual hierarchy. Michael Topper describes existence as comprising various densities or levels of reality, each with its own perception of what constitutes reality. These densities interact, vying for dominance, while teachers, adepts, and masters or avatars incarnate or project into these planes to guide beings according to the developmental stage of the Logos. I'll link to other videos where we go into these topics a little more in depth. This guidance often clashes with conventional understanding and is frequently rejected. The text emphasizes a complex interplay between individual spiritual growth and broader cosmic forces, framing life as a dynamic, multidimensional process. There are various levels, various densities, all fashioning their own ideas of what reality is, all beaming those ideas back and forth to one another, attempting to see which idea gains ascendancy. The importance of indigenous spiritual practice over extradimensional tutelage. Michael Topper warns us against seeking spiritual guidance from beings of other dimensions, aliens, spirits, etc., arguing that such guidance, even when well-intentioned, intersects humanity's plane obliquely and thus misaligns with humanity's unique developmental path. Instead, individuals should focus intensely on spiritual practices native to their own plane, aligning with their own higher intelligence rather than another's. The critique extends to the phenomenon of UFOs seen as a distraction from direct spiritual instruction, with an alternative path of awakening from such influences rather than engaging with them. It's very important at this juncture to apply yourself with maximum intention to the spiritual practice that is perennially brought to you by your local sponsors, rather than looking for your spiritual tutelage in other planes, dimensions, beings, or in other worlds who, despite sometimes their best intentions, are intersecting this dimension obliquely and therefore do not coincide on a one-to-one basis with the spiritual path of development that is indigenous with you. Critique of verbal communication and channeling. MT critiques verbal communications from higher density beings, a la channeling, arguing that they are inherently flawed due to the interpretive distortions of third density consciousness. Such messages, even from positive entities, introduce tricksterism, a misrepresentation or misunderstanding, because they must pass through the human conceptual mind, which is ill-equipped to grasp higher density truths. True higher dimensional consciousness, MT asserts, communicates non-verbally through seed points of suggestive insight, contrasting with the verbose, misleading nature of channeled material. Your own higher dimensional being is not verbal, and it doesn't communicate to you verbally, except very infrequently. Something may be formulated on a verbal basis, but usually, those kinds of communication are very economic. They exist as little seed points, and from these seed points, suggestive verbs discharge a wealth of nonverbal information. UFOs as a persistent but misleading presence. Mr. Michael Topper acknowledges UFOs as a permanent fixture in human consciousness, predicting increased interaction. Quote, pretty soon they'll be walking around on the ground, unquote. However, he warns against accepting their tutelage, likening it to following the Pied Piper due to the inevitable tricksterism involved. The goal is not to reject these beings entirely, but to engage them on equal footing by aligning with one's own higher consciousness, thus avoiding being misled by their oblique influence. Although you really should and have to at this point regard UFO as 666, in other words, the chatter of Corazon, something which is in and of itself unhelpful to you regardless of the particular type of communication or entity communicating, nonetheless, the subject of UFOs is going to persist. Equal footing with extra-dimensional beings. As interactions with other dimensional beings become unavoidable, Michael Topper stresses the need to align with one's own higher dimensional consciousness to meet these entities as equals. This alignment prevents the trip-up of tricksterism and ensures humanity's spiritual autonomy. Positive extraterrestrial beings, if aligned correctly, subtly guide individuals toward indigenous teachers rather than overtly directing them, preserving human agency and spiritual growth. So what's really imperative is that you have relationships with that form of consciousness on an equal footing. Obviously, rather than accepting that form of consciousness as your tutelage to the higher states, planes, and dimensions of your own being, you're necessarily going to have to align yourself with the higher dimensions of your being, simply in order to put yourself on equal footing with such consciousness. The role of spiritual teachers and the ego's resistance. In Matrix 4 excerpts, MT argues that truth initially appears as other because the ego self is closed to its greater reality, resisting the transformative influence of authentic spiritual teachers. These teachers, Manu, Bodhisattva, Maha Chohan, embody higher density consciousness in third density form, offering a dual sympathy that bridges planes. The ego seeks self-ratification but fears the otherness that completes it, necessitating guidance from an external teacher to awaken to the whole. Truth first comes in the form of other, because this ego self is not already awake, not already alive to its greater reality. It's closed to the greater reality, which necessarily then appears as an otherness to it. Awakening through spiritual adeptship. MT emphasizes that true spiritual adepts facilitate awakening, not just knowledge transfer, by aligning third density consciousness with higher planes. This process involves friction that third density minds resist, but it unlocks latent spiritual potency. A spiritual adept doesn't just teach or transfer knowledge through any of the forms in which he may function. A true spiritual adept always promotes your awakening, is always developing and working through various means toward that awakening. To close, the document weaves a narrative of spiritual urgency, critiquing external influences like UFOs and channeling, while advocating alignment with one's indigenous higher consciousness through incarnate teachers like AAA and MT. It details their struggles and the transformative potential of the Mother Book, framing humanity at a critical juncture where awakening or capitulation to negative forces hangs in the balance. Thank you for joining me on this Transmission Mr. Douglas episode. I do find Michael Topper's writings fascinating. If anything piqued your interest, drop your comment down below. Thanks for hanging, and I'll catch you on the next one.